Hi, this week is going to be a little bit rudimentary, but things that are very basic that most JavaScript courses miss. And I want to go over declaration and initialization, which we did in the lecture. But I also want to go over operators. And when I declare a variable, okay, I can declare it just by calling it some variable. So this is intended to hold some data at some point. What type of data, we have no idea yet. But because it's declared, I can reuse it and reassign it as we wish. The second I do this, it carves out a bit of memory in the program. But the good thing is that this will keep us honest. It's a good practice. That way we can utilize it down the road, and if, let's say, we don't have it utilized, we'll go back and say, hey, we declared this for some reason. What was the purpose? So that's a declaration. Now, if we want to do an initialization, I can just give it an assignment. Let's say it's some string. And now if I were to console.log some variable with type of, it would show me that it was a string type. So as we can, let's at first initialize and declare as much as we can. So if you can initialize it, I'm recommending you do that as a beginning learner. You'll do that because you'll learn about scope of variable, which is sort of a try and see thing. It's sort of tough to look at the PowerPoint and get whether something's accessible, the value of something is accessible. And in the presentation, I go over functions a little bit, and I write a function, and then we can console.log the variable. So I can say something like function test me, like this, and we haven't even gotten functions yet, but this is what this is about. And if I run that function like this, and console.log the variable some variable, that's how we can test whether something has value. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and console.log some variable, and then I'm going to go into operators and open it up in Chrome. And because we're using console.log, we can see in our developer tools whether it has variable or not, whether it has a value, and you see it has some string. So that's accessible within the function. However, if I were to declare it inside here like this, and then console.log outside, we can also test about the scope of that variable. And because our goal through this course is to get knowledge of structure, basically good practice. So now I get this, some variables not defined. Okay, well that's fine. What happens if I do var some variable like this? Is that defined? Yes, it is, but it's undefined. It kills the error, but you'll see that it is undefined. So what if, hypothetically, I do something like this, and I save it, and I run this, I get nothing. So when we initialize, we want to make sure that we're not going to use those variables in a function. But all I'll do is I'll structure things. Like if I'm writing a program, let's say it was, I don't know, a blog filter or something like that. I might say something like get the value of the variable, write, or the input field rather, write a function that validates said variable. And now I would know that I would need to, I could access the variable here if the thing were saved, or if the page were refreshed. But because input variable, I would need to grab the variable inside the function because that's the scope of the variable. And that's where this comes into play. Think about validating form fields specifically. So that's a thing you really need to play around with, and it's as simple as what I'm doing right now, which is just creating a quick little script and testing to see what has value where. Now let's take a minute and talk about operators. Okay, in JavaScript, and if you have a past programming language, the operators are very, very similar. They have the plus, the minus, the divide, the multiply, and that's fine. Those are easy. What about this little guy? He's called a modulus. So if I had something like var first equals 8, and I had var first, or second rather, equals 4, and I were to console.log first modulus second. Well, this would be a remainder of 0 because that's what the modulus does. So if I hit refresh and run it, I see 0. Now, this is one of the few that most people don't know. So if I were to do 5, the remainder should be 3. So I'm saving and then hitting refresh, and there you see the remainder is 3. So what the heck is this used for? Well, believe it or not, it's used for a lot of things. Think of a thumbnail gallery where you have three pictures per row. What I can say is if thumbnail number modulus 3 is equal to 0, and we're going to talk about the triple equals in a second, then, echo, or I'm sorry, in PHP mode there, then document dot write a break tag. And that would make sure that the row went on to the next row. So 1, 2, 3. At 3, the modulus is 0. 4, 5, 6. At 6, the modulus is 0. So that's how you can get order in your numbers. So the modulus is pretty unknown. Now let's talk about some other ones. Now, I know I showed this in the PowerPoint. I think I did. But if we do something like string, okay, and we did 8 like here, and we write if, I'm displaying now the difference between 2 equals and 3 equals. So if this is equal to second, we'll console.log they are equal. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and save that, and you see they are equal. But that's the seconds. Those are comparison operators. And if I were to add a third equal like this, well, that's a little different. You see there's no equal there. There's no equality. And that's because the third equals will ask for not only the values being equal, but also the type. Since this is a string and a number, they are not equal. But if I were to add something like an 8 in a string, they would be equal again. So that's another subtle unknown thing that you want 3 equals, and I would do that as much as possible while you're starting to learn. So the other thing I want to teach you is the concatenation operators, and I'll do that with a loop. So concatenation generally is a term for strings, but let's talk about in a loop where we started at 0 and I is less than or equal to 100 and I plus plus. Okay, so let's say this, I had some variable and I'm going to call this var, we'll call it stocks. Okay, and if I were to, we have several operators here, but let's say I were to say stocks plus equals I. This basically is the operator I'm trying to teach right now. This is an incremental, which you probably figured out from the lecture, but this is an interesting thing because stocks plus equals I, if I were to console.log this at the end, it would maintain the value of stocks throughout the loop. So if I do this, and I save, and I refresh, I get not a number, first of all, which is a mistake. So what I can do is say something like var stocks equals 0. That would declare it as a number. And now I can run it, and I get 50-50. Now, is that really what it is? Well, let's do 1 through 5, just to test. Because 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, 6 plus 4 is 10, and 10 plus 5 is 15. So if we run 5 turns of the loop on that, we get 15. So you can see that it is continually pouring the value into stocks. Whereas if I were to take out the plus sign like this, it would show me the last number of I, which is 5. So the incremental is a very important thing, and it works with every operator. You could say something like multiply, and it would take the value of stocks and multiply it by itself. So let me do that real quick. I got to make sure that we started at 1. So I'm going to continually multiply these, and we'll console.log stocks inside the loop so you get a good view of it. So as we run through here, we have 5 and it's constantly 0, and stocks multiply itself because it's always 1. We'll start this at 1 and run it, and you see it continually multiplies by itself. So a silly little error there because I had stocks initialized as 1. But that is the incremental. So you can use these to your benefit. Now we're going to go heavy into for loops next session. But for now, each one of these things, you could do minus, you could do plus, and those are the most important things because we're constantly asked to program things that will calculate, and often inside the turn of a loop. So those are some big operators that you need to know. Couple that with the ones that are taught in the lesson, and let's talk about that when we do our Google Hangout. So the big things to remember that most people miss, and that's why a supplementary screencast is necessary, is your fabulous modulus, your incremental that keeps the value and continually adds to it or multiplies to it. Those are the biggies, and also the triple equals we just went over. And let's not forget the little plus plus, which is an increment, which is also a decrement like this. So basically this for loop, which we'll get into next week, starts at 1, and as long as it's less than 5, it will continually add if I have the plus plus. So I know I ran over that pretty quickly. My screencasts generally have a limitation of 15 minutes, so I want to cut this off. But the biggest operators that most people forget are these.